20 September 1944. Dawn fog sits low over hedgerows east of Aracourt, Lorraine. Engines cough and settle. Tank retrievers reverse to the hiss of wet grass. Lieutenant Colonel Cretan Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion climbs down from a Sherman that was a wreck at dusk and is a runner again at first light. Combat Command A under Colonel Bruce C. Clark has spent the night doing what this army has trained to do: recover, repair, refuel, rearm, and reassemble the net before the next thrust. Across the grey fields, German Panthers from Panzer Brigades 111 and 113 feel for lanes that do not exist on their maps. Their commander at army level is General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel. The date, the ground, and the order of battle fix the frame. The Battle of Aracourt, 18 to 29 September U.S. 4th Armored Division against 5th Panzer Army. The viewers stand on the track with Abrams for a reason. The title is not a duel. It is a procedure against a script. The U.S. procedure is uptime. Crews strip track pins by lantern, replace a road wheel, swap a final drive, and pull a clogged air filter. Ordnance men lay out spares like a field grocer. A crew chief reads a chalked list and checks off items: ring gear, idler, arm, fan belt, 1 coax, barrel 80 rounds, 75 millimeters, 3 boxes, 30 ball, 1 box, 50 tracer. The point is not glamour. The point is availability. The German script breaks here in fog and in timing. New Panther's green crews, hurried briefing, poor reconnaissance, and no time to learn the lanes. The brigades drive where aerial photos and map studies say they should, but cavalry screens and artillery pre-registration say otherwise. The contact is not theatrical. It is attrition by drill on ground the Americans have measured overnight. Listen for the logistics line that makes this scene possible. The road behind Clark and Abrams is a one-way conveyor of fuel and ammunition that never sleeps. Red Ball Express truck columns and restored rail lifts push tonnage forward in a cadence that shoves the tactical fight. In September, the theater measures daily freight in the tens of thousands of tons, with rail burdens climbing into the tens of thousands per day by the new year, and peak days later, spiking far higher as more ports open and lines are repaired. The numbers are not garnish. They are the reason the battalion can fight in the morning after losing runners in the evening. Now cut wide briefly to the factory floor that set the rhythm months earlier. AB 24 every 63 minutes at Willow Run is not just a Marvel line in a magazine. It is the grammar of replaceable assemblies and standardized work that follows each bomber and tank and truck into the field. The plant cadence becomes field cadence, depot kits, interchangeable parts, and procedures that a sergeant can teach in minutes. That grammar shows up here in Lorraine when an M4 leaves the repair line before the fog lifts. The German experts, who rated American machines as crude or cheap, had a specific point about armor and gun matchups. They did not yet see the whole sentence that those machines spoke when supported by the line behind them. Back to the hedgerow. A forward observer calls a correction. The 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions bracket a lane the Panthers must take to clear a rise. The weather that masked the German approach also blinds their artillery and air cover. The result is not spectacle but pattern: short bounds, hull-down notches, a first shot from a stabilized gun at a target forced to crest, then a displacement into the next notch before the reply. When a Sherman throws a track, a retriever is already idling. When a gun tube washes out, there is a spare. When a radio burns, there is a handset waiting in the maintenance tent. The section ends with a reality that matches the historical record for these days around Aracourt U.S. Armored units with fewer and lighter tanks generate more effective combat time because their system returns damaged vehicles to the line and keeps ammunition and fuel at the point of contact. The German side fights hard with technically superior frontal armor and long guns, but with thin reconnaissance, green crews, and fragile sustainment under pressure. The clash is decided not by the single exchange, but by the number of exchanges one side can afford to make in a single day. German after-action notes from 5th Panzer Army staff under General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel describe surprise at the American return time and artillery response cycle on this ground. Officers who had rated the M4 as technically inferior on armor and gun length wrote that U.S. recovery and pre-registered fire denied the German long gun advantage by hours, not by rhetoric. The shock was not the machine in isolation. The shock was the machine that returned before noon after taking damage at dawn. 21 September, 1944. Night oil on canvas. Lanterns throw hard shadows across a hedgerow paddock that is now a maintenance street. The battalion wrecker sets its brake. A Sherman with a sprung track limps in on bare road wheels. The crew climbs down, faces black with cordite and dust. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams does not waste a sentence. He points, divides tasks, and moves to the next hull. Ordnance men already have the bins open. A replacement final drive lies on a canvas sheet. A section leader calls out the checklist in a flat voice that sounds like a ritual. Fuel, ammunition, idlers, radios, optics, track pins. By the time the eastern sky lightens, the line has shifted from torn to tight. Combat Command A, under Colonel Bruce C. Clark will send out companies that on paper should be short. The system refuses to accept the paper. The system puts steel back on the line. The map is a tight web northwest and east of Aracourt, Les Yvelines, Bézange, La Petite Zanre, and the ridges and swales between them. Fog still clings to the low ground, but it is thinner than yesterday. 5th Panzer Army pushes again, with Panzer Brigade 111 on one axis and Panzer Brigade 113 on another, feeling for a seam that the Americans refuse to leave unstitched. Cavalry screens touch and fall back. Forward observers from the 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions mark the likely lanes and walk the sheaf up the reverse slope. A telephone line strung during the night rides low in the ditch. When a Panther noses into the fatal angle, the first salvo is already in flight. Uptime looks like small, ordinary motions that add up. A driver checks a fan belt with 2 fingers. A gunner wipes carbon from a 75mm extractor groove. A motor sergeant swaps a magneto and tests a radio in the same breath. A corporal from the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion sits on an ammunition crate boots, steaming and reloads bandoliers, as if that is all there is in the world to do. None of this is theatrical. All of this is why a battalion that bled runners yesterday can make the first bound today. The title demands proof that procedure outruns precision. The proof is inventory on the line at first light. Contact comes early, near lazy. Short bounds, turret clocks, range calls that sound like school drills. A Panther tries to crest where the map says the ground is safe. The ground lies. The first American round meets the glacis with no effect. The second bites at the lower edge of the mantlet. The third is a side plate that should never have been offered. The German crew fights back on training that is still fresh ink. Another Panther moves up to trade its long gun for reach. It finds a pre-registered notch. The exchange is not about who is braver. The exchange is about who can afford to miss twice and still be present for the 4th shot. Midday, the fog thins to a white glare. Radios crackle with a new voice overhead. XIX Tactical Air Command has sniffed a break in the weather. P-47. Thunderbolts drop in pairs, then in fours, strafing the lanes and hedgerow gaps that armored cavalry has already marked with smoke. The effect is not a decisive airstrike tableau. The effect is a shove. German columns pause or detour, which hands more minutes to American guns already laid on the ridge. Those minutes are logistics. Those minutes are the chance for a disabled M4 to come off the wrecker and into a gun notch before the next push lands. On the maintenance street, a runner that was pronounced dead at dusk now idles with a new ring gear. An ordnance corporal taps a chalk line through the parts bin. Fewer items here means more machines there. A clerk sets another count next to yesterday's count and another line under that. The numbers are the sentence the theater keeps writing. Rail lifts behind the front have restarted. Truck companies on regulated routes push fuel and ammunition in a one-way stream. A depot farther to the rear breaks down assemblies into kits that any field shop can install. Interchangeability is not an idea. Interchangeability is a bolt that threads on the first try, in rain with cold hands at night. German precision remains real in every duel. A Panther that gets the angle and the time will punish an M4 that presents the wrong surface. But the German script keeps breaking, where the road and the clock meet. Green crews do not know this hedgerow pattern yet. Reconnaissance is thin. Drivelines protest long road marches. Recovery assets are few. When a Panther throws a track, it can become a marker on the lane rather than a machine returned by evening. That is not a moral failing. That is a system under strain that cannot generate returns fast enough to match the rate of contact. By late afternoon, Combat Command A has shifted the line in shallow steps rather than sweeping gestures. The viewer may be waiting for an exchange that crowns a hero. The script refuses that expectation. The names the camera holds are real, and already known to the record Clark Abrams. The artillery battalion commanders, who answer corrections in seconds. The motor officers who never appear in a headline, but decide how many barrels speak at noon. The cumulative result is visible at a glance as dusk approaches. More American hulls sit in fighting positions than the enemy expected. Enough of those hulls will still be there at dawn to repeat the drill. That repeats the lesson the title promises. Procedure wins the day by showing up for the next one. 22. September 1944. Gray breaks to a thin blue over Lorraine. The hedgerows hold a wet hush that lasts exactly until the first engine catches. A wrecker noses out of a farm lane with a Sherman behind it, tow bar clanking, and angles toward a shallow rise west of Uvalese. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stands on a fender for a moment, scanning the line. Colonel Bruce C., Clark's Combat Command A, has spent 2 nights converting damage into inventory, and this morning, the arithmetic is visible in steel. Gun tubes that were read yesterday are cleaned and retracted. Radios that squealed are tuned. Track pins that were seized now sit in a canvas sack, replaced and counted. The battalion intends to meet another push with the same drill that held the last 2. 5th Panzer Army sends weight again. Panzer Brigade 111 feels forward on the Uvalise ridgeline, while Panzer Brigade 113 searches the low ground toward Bézange-la-Petite and Zanray. The plan is rational: divide American attention with 2 hard thrusts and find a lane that the map insists must be there. The problem is the clock. Cavalry screens from 25th Cavalry Squadron have already inked likely avenues. Forward observers from the 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions write their own script in grease pencil, on range cards, and then in airbursts over hedges. When the first Panthers edge into the fatal angle, the sheaf is ready. White puffs hang a beat too long in the thinning mist. The German crews are trained, but they are new to this ground, and the ground lies. On the American flank, another piece of the system shows elements of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion in M18S that can sprint where a Sherman lumbers, slide into defilade that armored cavalry and engineers opened during the night. The doctrine is plain and practiced: let the long gun search for you while you hold a shot that will bite. An M18 dart stops in a notch, fires, and is gone. This is not a duel to crown a name. It is a choreography written in training areas and motor pools, then rehearsed on roads. The speed of the M18 matters less than the speed of the recovery truck that will move it when it throws a track, and the speed of the fuel truck that will keep it on the dance floor. By mid-morning, contact is general. Les Uvalise the creases between fields named on maps that every non-commissioned officer carries. Range calls ride the net. Turret clocks tick. A Panther crests to bring its 75mm to bear and shows a side plate for an instant too long. A Sherman in a notch answers. The first American round fails. The second dents. The third lands where the plate thins toward the rear bogey. If the angle is wrong, the next gun in the next notch answers, without anyone breaking cadence to announce a hero. A runner that took a hit is already sliding back behind a hedge, where a wrecker and a motor sergeant are waiting with a kit from a depot that broke down assemblies into bolts and gaskets weeks ago. Interchangeability is not an idea in a report. Interchangeability is a nut that threads on the first try with cold fingers at dawn. The technology that mattered here was bigger than a gun and a plate. Standardized radios on the battalion net kept fire corrections clean and quick. Depot kits turned complex assemblies into steps a motor sergeant could finish in rain and dark without a search. XIX Tactical Air Command arrived in tens of minutes when the ceiling lifted because procedures were rehearsed against cavalry smoke and pre-registered lanes. This was not a single invention. This was a stack of standardization that made every crew quicker and every hour count. The theater behind the camera keeps pushing the tempo. Regulated truck routes carry gasoline forward in a one-way stream. Ammunition tables are piles of crates counted against expenditure sheets that a clerk will file by lantern after dark. Rail lifts broken in August are up in September. Ports that were choked are clearing. None of that is visible in a single shot, but all of it is audible in the way battalion nets do not go silent for lack of ammunition or fuel. The logistics line is a sound note: engines that do not sputter at noon, guns that do not go quiet when the fight is hottest. German precision remains real. A Panther that wins the angle punishes an American hull that shows too much. A crew that keeps its head can break a position if it reaches the reverse slope unmarked. But the German script keeps catching on the same snags. Road marches strain drivelines. Recovery teams are thin. Fuel points must move under fire and under weather. A machine that should be back by evening sits as a marker in a field because the system that ought to pull it cannot arrive in time. No one at 5th Panzer Army intended that outcome. It is not a question of courage. It is a question of return time. Shortly after midday, the sky goes hard white and then clears. XIX Tactical Air Command drops in again when the ceiling lifts. P-47 seconds slash along hedges, already tagged by cavalry smoke. The effect is cumulative and prosaic. Columns pause and bunch. Guns that were laid are adjusted and fire. Another minute here, another lane denied there. The viewer is asked to watch for the quiet beats. A tank that should not be present after 2 days of fighting is present. A gun that should be cold is hot. A crew that should be resting is on the line because the maintenance street ran through the night without drama. That is the realization the title promises. Procedure has outrun precision by showing up again at the same speed. Dusk folds in. A clerk at a card table writes the day's counts in a neat hand. Runners at first light, runners at noon, runners at dusk. Vehicles under repair with estimated return times. Ammunition expenditure balanced against arrivals by route. The names that matter are stamped across the ledger and across the ground. Clark Abrams, the 37th Tank Battalion, the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the 66th and 94th Armored Field. Artillery battalions, the cavalry troops that never let the map decide the lane. Nothing in the notebook claims to have changed the war. Everything in the notebook explains why this battalion will stand to again tomorrow, 24 September, 1944. A low ceiling rides the Lorraine fields at first light and lifts by mid-morning. The map squares do not change, but the rhythm does. 2 days of contact have taught each side what the ground will allow, and the American side has learned exactly how many machines it can return by dawn if the maintenance street runs without pause. Colonel Bruce C. Clark holds the line in shallow bites rather than long swings. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams walks the row of hulls that were under tarps at midnight and are idling now. A clerk closes yesterday's ledger and opens a new page for today's arithmetic. 5th Panzer Army pushes under a revised script. Reconnaissance feels harder at the seams near Besange-la-Petite and along the approaches to Juvisy. Nebelwerfer trails scratch the sky. When the first Panthers appear, they are better spaced, their overwatch tighter. The German crews are not slow learners. The trouble returns at the same place on the road and on the clock. Recovery is thin. Fuel points are mobile but brittle. When a machine breaks in a hedged lane, the team that should move it cannot always reach it before the next American artillery task lands. A tank that ought to be back by evening becomes a problem to drive around. The American answer is the same: drill faster. Cavalry has already smoked the notches that will matter. The 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions have range cards marked in pencil and grease, and lines are laid low in ditches where a boot will not snag them. A first sheaf walks up a reverse slope. An armored company slides by bounds into positions cut the previous night by engineers and farm tools. A Sherman hull that threw a track yesterday runs straight today because a crew chief and a motor sergeant ground a link to fit under lantern light. Interchangeability is a touch, not a concept. A nut threads on the first try with cold hands because the thread was cut to a standard months ago at a plant far from Lorraine. Late morning, the ceiling lifts. XIX Tactical Air Command rides the clearer margin. P-47 pairs hack at hedgerow gaps where cavalry smoke lingers. The effect is minutes banked, not a tableau. A lane closes. A column edges back. Guns laid on the reverse slope speak. The shove grants time for one more runner to leave the wrecker and enter a gun notch. On this front, the useful metric was minutes. Wrecker pull to reinsertion could be measured inside one daylight cycle when lanes held. Ammunition resupply ran to regulated routes rather than ad hoc calls, so companies regained their table load before the second push. Field shops closed common faults in 12 to 24 hours at second echelon. The net effect was more runners by noon, and enough runners by dusk to stand to again at first light. On the ground near Lezay, an M18 from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion snaps across a field cut and into defilade that cavalry scouts flagged with a rag on a stick. The gunner holds the lane and waits for a side plate that the map insists should never appear. The plate appears when a panther breaks cover to command the rise. The first round is off. The second is almost right. The third is the one that bites. The crew does not linger. The M18 slips away to the next mark. A wrecker and a fuel truck move in the same lattice behind the dance. If the M18 throws a track, it will be pulled before dark, if the lane stays open. If the fuel truck misses a turn, the regulated route brings another into the same square without a search. Midday contact is general again. Bézange-la-Petite, Zanre. The nameless swales between them. The hedgerow rhythm is exact. Range calls ride the net. Turret clocks short bounds. Guns that speak once from a notch and then speak again from another notch before a reply can land. A maintenance section swaps a magneto by the road with a poncho stretched overhead to keep mist off the open block. A corporal from the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion counts bandoliers and writes a neat figure in a notebook that will be matched to an ammunition truck's waybill at dusk. None of it belongs in a poster. All of it keeps a battalion present when the third attack of the day arrives. German precision continues to exact a price where the angle and the moment favor it. A panther that keeps the crest and catches an American hull in motion punishes the error. A salvo of Nebelwerfer rockets rattles men who have learned to mark the sound on the next range card. The difference is not courage. The difference is return time, measured in hours rather than days. The American side treats a disabled machine as a delay, not an absence. The German side too often sees a disabled machine become terrain. Dusk lays down with a thin rain. The day closes on numbers again, not on a speech. Runners at first light, runners at noon, runners at dusk, vehicles under repair with estimated return times, ammunition expended against crates received. The count is not a flourish, it is the spine. Experts will later read captured reports and technical evaluations that judge machines by armor and gun. The ledger on the card table says why the lighter tank keeps arriving, ready to fight the system that feeds it, outruns the one that faces it. 25 September 1944. Lorraine wakes under a high gray lid. The paddock that serves as a maintenance street is slick from night rain. A short row of runners idles, nose to tail, exhaust drifting across tarps still wet. Colonel Bruce C. Clark walks the line with a clipboard man who reads returns by hour. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stops at a hull that was down before midnight with a dead magneto and is up now with a clean spark. The battalion will hold by the same arithmetic as the last days, convert damage into inventory before first light commit by bounds recover without pause repeat. 5th Panzer Army does not release the ground near Juvalise and Bézange-la-Petite. The push is narrower intervals, smarter, overwatch tighter. When Panthers ease out of hedge lace, they do it in pairs, long guns hunting for side plates instead of frontal contests. The German crews have learned fast. The system behind them has not changed its return time. A thrown track in a narrow lane becomes a road problem rather than a machine back by evening. A drive line that should be swapped before noon waits. On the American side, minutes are banked in quiet motions. Cavalry from 25th Cavalry Squadron reflag notches tape ruts and cut a new slit through a farm wall with tools borrowed from a shed. Engineers set plank ramps so a wrecker will not dig in. Forward observers from the 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions lay lines low in ditches and mark reverse slopes with pencil corrections made steady by habit. When the first sheaf walks up the ridge near Lezay, yesterday's number is crossed out and today's is written neat. Mid-morning, the ceiling lifts enough for XIF's Tactical Air Command. P-47 pairs work hedgerow gaps that cavalry smoke has tagged. The effect is a shove measured in minutes, not a tableau. Columns hesitate and bunch. Guns that are already laid adjust by a finger width and fire. A runner still on a tow bar at dawn clears the hook and noses into a gun notch, with a crew who ate standing up. Near Bézange-la-Petite, a company sits too long on a forward slope and pays for it. A panther holds the crest and catches a shifting hull. The long 75 mm does exactly what training promised. Another panther edges forward to press the moment and shows too much side for an instant. A Sherman down the line had that angle on a card written in the night. The first round misses. The second finds the plate where it thins behind a bogey. There is no speech. There is a net call and a short move to a new notch before the reply lands. German evaluators who had inspected American weapons earlier in the campaign focused on armor, thickness, slope, and muzzle energy. Their ratings were not absurd, they were incomplete. On the Aracourt ground, those tables met a system that made average machines present on a schedule. Post-action comments from brigade and army staff note that the American edge appeared first as availability, then as fire delivered on time. Behind the camera, the theater keeps the schedule that makes this pace. Regulated truck routes push gasoline forward in a one-way stream. Ammunition runs to time rather than to ad hoc calls, so companies regain table load before the second push. Rail lifts that were down in August run now without drama. Depots break assemblies into kits with bolts bagged and labeled so a motor sergeant can finish a job in rain without a search. Interchangeability stays a touch, not a theory. A nut threads on the first try with cold hands because the thread is the same in every box. By early afternoon, the German thrust bends back off the Juvalise ridge, not for lack of courage but for lack of minutes. One panther waits as a marker where a wrecker could not reach. Another idles behind a hedge, with a driveline noise that promises a long halt. A third has fuel, but no lane that is not already fired in. The plan that made sense at dawn is thin by noon because the road and the clock will not cooperate. The American line does not answer with a sweep. It moves in measured bites. An M18 from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion slides into fresh defilade cut during the night, takes a shot, and is gone. A maintenance team swaps a radio head in the open under a poncho held up by two riflemen. A corporal from the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion counts bandoliers into neat stacks that will match a waybill at dusk. Nothing about the picture is heroic. Everything about it is exact. Dusk returns with a fine rain. The last image is a card table and a hand that writes the day's count. Runners at first light, runners at noon, runners at dusk. Vehicles down with estimated return times measured in hours, not days. Ammunition expended against crates received. The battalion will stand to again tomorrow because the system keeps converting damage into presence faster than the opponent can. 26 September, 1944. A dry wind pulls mist out of the hedges. The maintenance street is already emptying at first light. Runners idle nose to tail, chalk marks on fenders that show which crew changed which part under which tarp at night. Colonel Bruce C. Clark signs the sheet that lists returns by hour. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams walks the line and weighs action against inventory. The arithmetic holds: convert damage into presence, commit by bounds, recover without pause, repeat. 5th Panzer Army shifts weight toward the approaches to Uvalise and west toward Lizay. Spacing is cleaner. Overwatch is tighter. Panthers work in pairs, long 75mm guns, hunting for side plates and rear angles instead of frontal contests. Crews have learned. The problem remains at the road and the clock. Recovery is thin. Fuel points are brittle. A tank that breaks in a lane becomes traffic, not a machine, back before evening. American cavalry from 25th Cavalry Squadron reflag notches and cut fresh slits in farm walls with hand tools. Engineers set plank ramps so wreckers will not bury axles in mud. Forward observers from the 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions lay wire low in ditches and mark reverse slopes with pencil that smudges and is rewritten without fuss. When the first sheaf walks up a ridge east of Lizay, yesterday's range is crossed out and today's is written neat. The map squares do not change, the numbers do. Contact opens like a drill. Short bounds. Turret clocks. A notch prepared at night. A first round that fails to bite. A second that dents. A third that lands where the plate thins near the bogey. If the angle is wrong here, the next gun in the next notch answers without speech. A runner that takes a hit slides into cover where a wrecker noses down and a motor sergeant opens a roll of gaskets bagged in order. Interchangeability stays a touch, not a theory. A nut threads on the first try with cold fingers because the thread is the same across boxes and months. Mid-morning, the ceiling lifts. XIX Tactical Air Command works the margins. P-47 pairs nick hedgerow gaps that cavalry smoke tagged minutes before. The effect is minutes banked, not spectacle. A column hesitates. A lane closes. Guns that were already laid adjust by a finger width and fire. Those minutes pull a disabled hull off a lane before a second push arrives. Those minutes let a runner clear a tow bar and bump into a notch with a crew who ate standing up. German precision draws blood where angle and timing favor it. A panther that holds a crest too long pays for it. A panther that catches a Sherman crossing a field cut punishes the error. Courage is constant. The script breaks on return time. A drive line waits for a part that should have been there at noon. A thrown track sits under fire because the team that should pull it is late or pinned. A machine that ought to return by dusk becomes a marker in a hedge lane. Afternoon settles into the cadence that has ruled the week. Clark moves the line in shallow bites. Abrams calls a shift as soon as a correction lands. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion slides M-18s through openings, cavalry marked at gray light. An M-18 drops into a fresh notch, holds a lane, fires once, moves, and is gone. A maintenance section swaps a radio head under a poncho stretched against a spit of rain. A corporal from the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion stacks bandoliers to match a waybill. Nothing here belongs on a poster. Everything here keeps barrels hot at the hour that matters. 27 September, 1944. Fog comes back high and thin. The ledger on the card table tells the story without adjectives. Runners at first light, runners at noon, runners at dusk. Vehicles down with estimated return times written in hours, not days. Ammunition expended against crates received. Fuel drawn against schedule. Nets do not go silent when corrections matter. Engines do not stumble at noon. The shove is quiet and constant. Pressure slides again near Bézange-la-Petite. Panthers test the hedgerow pattern with better caution, then stall where range cards and pre-registered lanes do not forgive a moment of exposure. A Nebelwerfer salvo scrapes across a company line and rattles men who write the sound into the next correction. The Americans pay when a hull sits a beat too long on a forward slope. They answer by moving the notch rather than by calling on a name. The line survives because inventory keeps meeting contact. Dusk flattens the fields and pulls sound out of the hedges. A clerk writes figures that look like yesterday and the day before. The count is not flourish. The count is the argument. Experts will later argue guns and plates. The ledger here in Lorraine shows why the lighter hull keeps appearing ready to fight. The system that feeds it outruns the system it faces. Tomorrow morning will look like this morning. The road and the clock will make their claim again. 28 September, 1944. A pale sheet of cloud hangs over the hedges. The maintenance street is a bare lane by first light. Runners idle in a short row, noses pointed toward Lizay and Juvalise. Colonel Bruce C. Clark signs the morning sheet. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams taps a fender and sends a crew forward. The arithmetic is unromantic and exact. Convert damage into presence. Commit by bounds. Recover without pause. Repeat. 5th Panzer Army probes with smaller but sharper weight. Panthers come in disciplined pairs, interval and overwatch, correct long guns, hunting for the side plate that training films promised. The crews have learned the ground. The problem remains the road and the clock. A tank that should be pulled off a lane waits for a team that is pinned. A driveline that should be swapped before noon holds a column still at the wrong hour. Fuel points move under weather and fire and sometimes miss the next turn in the hedge maze. Precision at the crest does not cure delay on the lane. Cavalry from 25th Cavalry Squadron writes fresh flags against farm walls cut in the night. Engineers reset planks. Forward observers from the 66th and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions lay wire low and mark reverse slopes with pencil that smudges and is rewritten without fuss. When contact snaps, the sheaf is already walking. Short bounds. Turret clocks. A first round that fails. A second that dents. A third that lands where plate thins behind a bogey. If the lane denies the shot here, the next notch holds the angle there. A wrecker noses past a hedge and hooks a tow bar without a word. Interchangeability remains a touch in rain. A nut threads on the first try with cold hands because the thread is the same everywhere. Midday, the ceiling lifts enough. XIX Tactical Air Command rides the margin. P-47 pairs nick hedgerow gaps that cavalry smoke tagged, and the effect is minutes banked. A column hesitates. A lane closes. Guns already laid adjust by a finger width and fire. Those minutes are the difference between a machine returned by dusk and a machine that becomes terrain for the night. The cadence does not miss a beat. By late afternoon, the push has thinned. The American line does not surge. It takes shallow bites and resets the way it has for a week. A maintenance crew swaps a radio head under a tight poncho. A corporal from the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion stacks bandoliers to match a waybill. Nets stay clean. Engines do not stumble at noon. Barrels that should be cold are hot. The day folds on figures that look like yesterday and the day before. Runners at first light, runners at noon, runners at dusk. Vehicles down with estimated return times in hours, not days. Ammunition expended against crates received. Fuel drawn against schedule. 29 September 1944. The light is hard and thin. Reports ride out of the paddock in the same envelopes as requisitions. A clerk writes the last page of the ledger for the action around Aracourt. The count is plain. The battalion that started thin on paper kept arriving at the line with enough machines to meet each push. The formations that arrived with heavier guns could not keep the same pace on the same ground with the same clock. The difference did not live in a single duel or a single name. The difference lived in return time. At a headquarters table, staff officers pull in contact reports and recovery logs. No one writes a slogan. No one claims a transformation of the war. They stamp a page with date, place, and units, 4th Armored Division, against 5th Panzer Army Aracourt to Juvalise, late September. Notes are terse. Recovery worked. Pre-registration worked. Notches cut at night worked. Interchangeable assemblies and depot kits worked. Regulated routes delivered fuel and ammunition in time to keep barrels speaking in the afternoon of each day. The enemy fought with technical precision and bravery, but the road and the clock broke the script. German staff summaries circulated after the fighting admit that U.S. logistics and recovery tempo erased the expected edge of the Panther long gun at company scale. Closing remarks in several notes are blunt. The American procedure put more tubes in action at the hour that mattered. That not a single duel produced the shock. They had judged machines. They had not weighed the system that made those machines present again before the next hour.